You know, my wife and I were delivering some goodies to people the other day, and we had a distant conversation from the driveway to the porch kind of thing with this couple who's been married over 50 years. And at some point in the conversation, the husband of the couple said, "You know, our house is just not big enough right now." And he looked at his wife, and she looked at him. They live in a 3,000 square foot home. You see, the stay-at-home orders have created a unique situation in our marriages and in our families. They put us together under stress and duress in amounts of time that we're not really used to. And so it would be likely that conflict would be a result of that. My hope is that today, as we look at the scripture that David wrote in Psalm 139, we'll see he can give us some ideas for how we can maybe back out of some conflict and process it to get a benefit. Because God has promised that he would bring all things to good. So if he's putting my family together and all my kids together and I'm irritated or frustrated or whatever, his aim is to be good. His aim is good. So let's figure out how what I'm experiencing can be good by what the scripture says. So David says in Psalm 139, starting in verse 16, he says to God, he said, "God, your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. I praise you, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well." Another scripture says, "I was knitted together in my mother's womb. Fearfully and wonderfully I've been made." The deal is that there are characteristics that might be irritating us about our spouses or with our children that are really God-breathed, God-created characteristics. And under normal situations and normal stresses, we can kind of keep them at bay, but because we're kind of locked in together, some of those things become irritating to us. Because stress makes us self-absorbed. Stress makes us self-centered. Couple of those, just a couple examples, like extroverts. Extroverts get their batteries filled by being with people. So the more they're with people, the more batteries, their emotional batteries are charged. Introverts are the opposite of that. They get their batteries charged by being alone. So at first glance, you might think, well, the introverts, wow, they have it good, you know. They kind of have an introverted thing going on here. Good for them, but how hard for the extroverts? Because it is hard for them to connect. Yet if I'm an introvert and I'm locked up with my spouse and my family and I don't have the downtime to process, I could be a jerk because I'm not getting my batteries filled, right? I might be an external processor where I don't think about anything until it's coming out of my mouth. And as the words come out of my mouth, that's when I think about it, and that's how I process it. Or I might be an internal processor where I think about all that stuff on the inside, and maybe I share it with you if it comes up in the conversation, right? Those kinds of situations, we look at those kinds of situations and we point our fingers at each other and go, well, why are you doing it that way? I feel this way, da 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 da. Where these characteristics and others that you can think of, I could probably list 50, others that you can think of, are characteristics that God created in our spouses, that God created it in our children, and we need to be the ones to adjust around how he created them. There's also sin, pure and simple sin, self-centered, selfish sin, or maybe I've drug my baggage from my past into my marriage, and the tapes play because there's so much stress going on in our family life right now because we're together all the time. I love them, but I need my space, right? And so I feel like Jesus said that he said you can take everything and classify it into two things, the laws and the prophets. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. That's number one. And if I love him and I see it from his view, I might be able to see some of those things that might irritate me because I'm different about my children or my spouse, and say, you know what, I'm the one who has to submit to God's plan and how he created them. And then he said, love your neighbors as yourself. As a result of that experience with me, you'll be able to love your neighbor. Well, if I can love my neighbor, I should be able to love my family, right? It all starts in our connection with God, our submission to him, our understanding that there are some of the characteristics that we're dealing with right now in the strange and wonderful menagerie of how things have been put together that will stoke us when I need to submit to God and say, hey, this is just how God made my spouse, or this is how my kids were made. And I need to be able to separate that from a sin issue that needs forgiveness and restoration. So my hope is that during this time of sequestered families, that God, being the God who says that he brings all things to good, that we will take the opportunity to step back a little bit and look at the situations, whether they're God-breathed, God-given, or whether they're sin-given, and step back and say, how do we resolve the conflicts? How do we become a closer family? How do we become a tighter-knit, God-breathed family? And this is a time that we get a look at that stuff unlike any other in our lifetime. My hope is, church, that these thoughts have caused you to think a little bit and maybe process a little bit, and that you'll be able to step back, get with God, and figure out what are the things that I need to compromise because it's just how God made my spouse or my children, and what are the things that I need forgiveness for because I've stepped out of line. Please know that the stress of our world right now is probably the highest overall stress that has been there globally, nationally, in our lifetime. And then you add the normal things that you carry and the burdens that you have onto that, it's really easy to become self-centered. It's really easy to become me-focused and have all kinds of emotions that are counterproductive in our families. Blessings to you, church. Have a great, great, great day.